Invite our next speaker, and this is where we're looking at gathering a quick thought around what is the real deal when we're talking about building sustainable strategy and transformation. Now, our next speaker is an internationally recognized public policy expert. He's an author, columnist, as well as an institution builder as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, founder, chief executive officer, Council of Energy, Environment and Water. So if I could please humbly invite on stage none other than Dr. Arunabha Ghosh so that we can deep dive into this very thought-provoking session coming your way. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together as well. Please help me welcome our next speaker, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important conference. As I've been sitting at the back, not as a backbencher, but really trying to absorb all the conversations that are happening. A lot of the comments that have been coming up have been really about not just what to do, but quite a bit about how different companies have been trying to do it. The how is where things begin to get real. So what I wanted to talk to you today about is a combination of the what and the how. But what matters here is not just the what and the how, but the who. Who are we going to be acting as in this transformation towards a sustainable future? I represent the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We are a public policy institution ranked among the 20 best climate think tanks in the world. As you can see from our work, we focus on system-level transformations, on the economy as a whole, the energy sector, the industrial sector. But we also focus on the quality of life issues, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, how we cool ourselves in a hot country. To make any of this happen, you need the enablers of finance, of technology, of the new drivers of circular economy, of building resilience, but also driving cooperation across the world. So the question I wanted to start off with is, if we were all playing this game of the move towards sustainability and the fight against climate change, who would you like to be as a player? Would you like to be the global player? Would you like to be a national policy level player? Would you like to be a subnational policy level player? Would you like to represent the private sector? Or do you see this from the point of view of the individual? And my submission to you is that all of these 5 players matter, but it comes together when we understand the different roles each of these players are playing. So let's start with the first. What's happening at the global level? We're having this conversation just a couple of weeks after the Summit of the Future at the UN, where again, we've realized that the world as a whole is well off track from the SDGs. And we're having this conversation just before the next climate summit scheduled for Baku in Azerbaijan. So a combination of international forums are necessary to understand what's going on. The first is, you've got the international climate negotiations. The picture on the left is when the Paris Agreement was agreed in 2015. The picture on the right, of course, is the upcoming Baku conference, where we're going to discuss what is the new definition and quantum of climate finance. But against these multilateral forums where annual negotiations go on, there are also plurilateral forums, such as the G20. 20 countries, plus the European Union and the African Union, however, representing well over 80% of global GDP. There are other kinds of plurilateral platforms also that have started emerging. India itself has created the International Solar Alliance, along with France, which now has 119 member countries. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which is more focused on resilience. Last year, on the sidelines of our G20 summit, the Global Biofuels Alliance. And then that last photograph is a smaller plurilateral grouping of the Quad countries, where also conversations around critical minerals, around supply chains, around advanced technologies are coming together. Why does this matter? It matters because, in a way, these multilateral conversations or plurilateral conversations are setting the larger kind of context within which our individual decisions as companies, as businesses, as individuals are coming together. To translate that, we've got the national level there as well. And the national level policy making in India, at least so far, has been focused on driving clean energy, clean mobility, and clean industrialization. The progress is pretty dramatic. In 2010, India had less than 20 megawatts of solar. We now have nearly 90,000 megawatts of solar, well over 150,000 megawatts of renewables, and well over 200,000 megawatts of non-fossil electricity capacity, making up for over 46% of the established deployed power sector capacity and making India the fourth largest renewables market in the world. So this dramatic increase is one way in which policy has helped create a market that didn't exist. When the solar auctions began way back in 2010-11, the cost of solar was about 20 rupees a unit. It's down to 2.5 rupees a unit. Why? Because it requires, on one hand, the long-term policy signal. It requires, on the other hand, clear, transparent auctions to drive down prices on the basis of competition. And it also, of course, requires the private sector to come and play the game. There are new areas in which that game might be played. So let's talk about mobility. I'm assuming most of us here have actually come in a car or in a taxi. Maybe some of us have taken the AeroCity metro. But when we did the largest survey on urban mobility in India, we found that well over 60% of urban Indians, their primary form of mobility is their two legs. So urban India is still not heavily motorized. In order to motorize it, we also have to motorize it sustainably. So this data is now coming from CEW's real-time e-mobility dashboard. You can Google CEW EV dashboard. And every few days, this dashboard is getting updated by the number of EVs sold in India. Now look at the number. 10 years ago, financial year 2014-15, 2,399 EVs sold. The financial year that closed in March, 1.67 million EVs sold. Most of these, over 90%, are two-wheelers or three-wheelers. None of these is a Tesla. So when we think about electric mobility, again, we've got to start thinking about in a country like India, or in Southeast Asia, or in Sub-Saharan Africa, what is that mobility transition going to look like, and how do we convert it into an opportunity? The picture up there is about e-autos. In fact, that's a woman e-auto driver in Amritsar. The picture below is of e-buses. Now, India did the world's largest single auction of e-buses, 5,000 e-buses at one go. And now, increasingly, there is the push for even more, state by state by state. This is a very different pattern of sustainable mobility compared to the way we've been enamored by the high-tech version of four-wheeler EV transportation. And then comes industrial sustainability. Steel, cement, fertilizer, aluminium, petrochemicals. These account for about 80%, 75 to 80% of our industrial greenhouse gas emissions. They can't be electrified very easily. They are what are called hard to abate sectors. In order to clean them up, we need alternative fuels. So green hydrogen, which is basically splitting water into oxygen and hydrogen, but using clean energy to do that, could be one of those industrial fuels. If you look at this chart, there are dozens of countries across the world that have hydrogen missions. But right on top, after the European Union and the United States, India's green hydrogen mission is the second largest in the world, with a target of 5 million tons of green hydrogen production by 2030. This makes sense because if you look at the map, the tropics is where the sun shines the most and where, therefore, we can get the lowest cost production of this advanced industrial fuel. So when we start thinking about the global and the national, then we say the stuff gets even more real when we get into the subnational level. And that's where the quality of life of citizens becomes important. Sustainability is not just about clean energy and clean mobility and clean industrialization. It's about you and me as citizens. Despite its growth, India has also become heavily polluted. Over the last 20 years, we have gone from over 50% of the population breathing air that met our national ambient air quality standards down to less than 30%. Now, you might think this is an environmental cost we are willing to deal with. Sadly, you'll be wrong, because this is an economic cost to our growth aspirations. Air pollution is costing India 3% of its GDP from business losses. 42 of 50 of the world's most polluted cities are in India. 17% of the national disease burden is arising from air pollution. More importantly, up to 10% of productivity loss in employees is happening because of air pollution. Even our clean energy aspirations get impacted when solar PV efficiencies drop. So if we actually care about economic growth, then we have to start thinking not just about air pollution as a liability, but clean air as an asset that drives the growth. It's not environment versus growth, it's environment for growth. The same applies to wastewater. Less than 40% of India's urban wastewater gets treated. And that's why when we talk about treating wastewater, we think of it as a capex. And we say, well, the cities don't have money, private sector can't get paid, the STPs don't get built, so it becomes a cycle that goes on and on. But when we started evaluating the potential for the circular economy of reusing treated wastewater, we see that, for instance, there's a $12 billion additional revenue that we could make just from horticulture in India using treated wastewater. We could irrigate an area 9 times the size of Delhi just with treated wastewater. Once you start seeing the value in circular economy, it's not a capex play, it becomes an opex play plus a revenue play. And suddenly the business model becomes that much more attractive. Let's talk about agriculture. 60 years ago, we kicked off our green revolution. That has, of course, helped to feed Indians. It's also helped to deplete our groundwater, inject a lot more chemicals and fertilizers, chemical fertilizer and pesticides in our soils. We need food security, but with sustainable agricultural practices. So we did the first mapping of all sustainable agricultural practices in India, more than 30 of them across the country. And we see that of the about 130 to 140 million hectares under farming in India, only about 5 practices, precision farming, agroforestry, rainwater harvesting, mulching, etc., cross more than 5 million hectares. So there's a huge potential of taking sustainable agricultural practices out to scale while ensuring food security and better nutrition for our people. And finally, back to our cities, we are a hot country which is going to get hotter. Cooling demand in India will grow 8x over the next 2 decades, creating an opportunity, of course, for air conditioner sales. But guess what? Super efficient ceiling fans is a potential $20 billion market in India. And of course, we can have more passive cooling by better architecture. And that brings me to the final 2 players, the private sector and, of course, the individual. The private sector then has to leverage all these opportunities, but also identify the risks. We've got a concentration of supply, whether it's solar panels or lithium-ion batteries, whether it's critical minerals or clean tech technologies. So India then has to build robust manufacturing competitiveness here at home. So this, maybe you can't read it very clearly, but we've identified component by component what kind of components in solar or batteries or electrolyzers where India has already got a competitive advantage or could quickly break into export markets, where we could massively indigenize the production of hydrogen electrolyzers and invest hundreds of billions of dollars at home. The same applies to heavy industry. How do you decarbonize steel, cement, aluminium? Over the course of several decades, there will be large capex involved, but it will also help India stay at the front line of the technology curve in the case of heavy industries such as green steel, green cement, green aluminium, and leapfrog the trade barriers that are coming our way. To do all of that, of course, we need investment. The bulk of clean tech investment is still going to China, US, EU. The share of clean tech investment in India or Southeast Asia has remained flat over the last 5 years, even as the quantum has gone up. So how do we make India a hub for sustainable finance to drive a lot of those opportunities that are emerging? The way to do this is to recognize that already renewables, mobility, semiconductor manufacturing, these are already getting a lot of investments, and new sectors will emerge, new and circular materials, clean tech, fintech, space tech. These will be the startups which will attract capital in the coming years. Equity also of various kinds is flowing. Sovereign wealth funds, private equity, public equity, venture capital, they're flowing into renewables, mostly by sovereign wealth funds and private equity and public equity. But for green hydrogen, we need bigger balance sheets. For electric mobility, a lot more of the VC funding is going. So depending on which part of this value chain or which sector you want to play in, you start noticing the opportunities that come together. So finally, the individual counts, because it is our lifestyle that matters. So when we actually looked at lifestyles in developing countries and emerging markets versus developed countries, we saw that even the richest 10% in developed countries and in China adopting low carbon lifestyles could save over 3.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide yearly. So as I conclude, and I see the Honorable Minister is already here, I want to conclude with the notion of Mission Life, which Honorable Prime Minister launched 2 years ago. The GDP equation is about consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports. Now, how about we have lifestyle-based consumption, lifestyle-based investment, lifestyle-based government expenditure, lifestyle-based net exports. And we see then that the 4 pillars of life come together, whether it's in nudging behavior and improving markets for consumption of sustainable goods and services, for instance, sustainable food, millets, or in using nudging behavior and improving markets for driving sustainably focused businesses, or in leveraging the power of government procurement to build out the world's largest solar irrigation program, or the largest deployment of LED light bulbs, or finally, leverage these technologies for the export markets. Lifestyle is not just about switching off our lights and fans. It's about combining the nudging of individual behavior and creating the markets at scale that convert our GDP into a lifestyle-based GDP that's worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So I started with the 5 players and I'm ending with the 5 players. We have the global as the umpire. We've got the private sector and the individual basically playing on the pitch. And the national policy and the subnational policy set the field. It does not matter which of these sectors or players you're representing. It's together that we create the playing pitch to make it a real deal for sustainability. Thank you very much.